Hello everyone and welcome to the Dyslexia Life Hacks Show. I'm your host Matthew Head, and in this episode I'm talking to Jo Rees. She is the founder of Another Way Round Dyslexic Support, which provides specialist support for children, parents and adults. Her background is as a primary school teacher, which she did for over 22 years. That included being a Senko. She's active on TikTok with over 70,000 followers, where she spreads great information about dyslexia and a few dance videos thrown in too. I will put links to Another Way Around Dyslexic Support and Jo, as well as some other things we talk about in the show notes, which will be available at dyslexialifehacks.com/podcast. Hey there, this is Matt from the editing room. Stay tuned at the end of the episode as Jo adds more to her thoughts on the final rapid fire question. She has lots of really interesting insights when she took a day or two to think about what the answer was. Now back to the episode. Welcome to the show, Jo.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Matt. It's great to see you again.
No problem. Yeah, it's great to see you too. A little bit of background before we start. We met each other at Dyslexia Show 2023, which was in March. We're now recording this in May.
Yeah.
It's that late already.
I know, it's gone quick, hasn't it?
Yeah, where we ended up being two lost souls at the evening dinner and ended up talking to each other over dinner, as well as Paul Daniels, a previous guest on his podcast.
Oh, amazing.
So where I wanted to start with is that I know that you found out your dyslexia at age 34, but you were clearly working as a teacher at that point. So what's it like being a teacher and being an unknown dyslexic at the same time?
Well, the crazy thing is, obviously, I didn't really know. So, and this highlights so many issues. So I did my GCSEs, got like average grades, did my A-levels, just about scraped English. I'll save that story for maybe later on. Did a degree. I was the first person in my family to have ever done a degree, but my degree was in dance, drama and English. So I totally played to my strengths, hence the older TikTok dance videos thrown in every now and again. And then kind of decided I wanted to be a teacher because I had a horrendous time doing my degree, really struggled being away from my family, actually found the studying really hard, didn't realise at the time it was because I was potentially dyslexic. And I found solace in a independent school next to university. For one afternoon a week, I would go and I would hear the children that were really struggling with reading learn to read. And that kind of really ignited this passion in me that I wanted to kind of help these kids learn to read. So I did my postgraduate certificate in teaching and qualified as a teacher, did really well at all the practicals throughout my teacher training, struggled with the theory, that will be no surprise. Again, didn't really know why, kind of just thought it was perhaps because I hadn't worked hard enough or wasn't interested. And interestingly, teaching again, so many dyslexics will tell you, I'm sure you've heard this time and time again, that we can be quite good at blagging or quite good at kind of compensating and finding ways to kind of cover up what we're not very good at. So one of the things I really struggled with were planning formats. So quite often schools will have like a set planning format that you have to adhere to and you have to follow. And the first school I was at was actually an outstanding school. I was only there for a year, hated it. But again, another story. But they had this really strict planning format. And I just could not get on with it at all. It just did not work for me. It did not work how my brain kind of thought. But basically, I quite quickly got savvy that if on my weekly observation or whatever, if my lesson was really strong and was kind of a good to outstanding in terms of the practical, and if they could see progress in my kids' books, nobody looked at the planning. So basically I'd bust the gut to create these amazing activities and just constantly made sure that my kids were making really good progress and that their books looked really good, that nobody ever really took much notice of what was in the planning. And then if anybody ever asked me to hand my planning in for a particular lesson or a particular week, I'd obviously go all out and stay up all night and sort that out. But that was one of the things that was tricky. I think another thing that was tricky was actually my spelling was really weak. My spelling continues to be very weak. Again, my big strategy was I wouldn't go above Key Stage 1. So I only taught up to Year 2 initially for the first couple of years, because I could generally spell the words that they needed to spell. And I could, and again, joking apart, I could read the vocabulary because, it's not long. Actually, you can think of like some of the scientific terms, like actually I kind of got my head around that kind of Key Stage 2 vocabulary. I qualified as a teacher before Google existed and like before spell checkers and things. So I just always had a dictionary to hand. But it did make marking quite tricky at times. But again, I would just have to double check things using a dictionary. Or again, I would find ways around it. So for example, like when marking, I almost like made myself like a checklist of words that I could use that I would have to hand. So words that I knew I would use over and over again. I created a checklist so I could just copy them, or I could quickly cross-reference that I'd spelt something correctly. So those were kind of like my big barriers, I guess, if you like. But initially, I just loved teaching. I loved being with the kids. Like, I loved the fact that I was able to make a difference to children. Had no idea why I was so passionate about supporting children with additional needs at that precise moment in time. But I was, just really passionate about helping the kids that were kind of really struggling. Yeah, and loved it. I had great days as a teacher.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? You were saying about making everything so good that the lesson plans were not an issue. Clearly, the bits you don't like. It's interesting how people do that, and various guests have done that, where they just make the strength so strong that it kind of it kind of masks the weakness to a point. You kind of don't have to do that.
So let me just share. So I've actually made a TikTok about that this week. So I'm a governor now, so I don't work in schools anymore. But I don't, as in I'm not employed by a school anymore. I go in and out of schools all the time. Yes. But one of the things I've tried to do to kind of keep up to date with what's going on is when I actually left education and set my company up, I was invited by a local school to be a governor. So I've been a governor at a local school now for about 9 years, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of a standing joke because I never really read the emails until the last minute. But basically, I get away with it because I'm just really good at talking and I kind of use all the right words and kind of, we'll go in and do an observation before the meeting or kind of get away with it. But this week, I was totally kind of like my dyslexic mask well and truly fell off in the meeting. So they moved. It is funny, but it's not funny. So like I said, I'm hopeless at reading emails. So they've signed up to something called Governor Hub, which is an app. Mm-hmm. So they were like, Jo, you are not leaving this meeting until we've got you on that app. So I was like, okay. And in my head, I'm thinking the whole way through the meeting, this is going to be a disaster because me and technology. And anyway, so basically, I've managed to download the app.
That's a start.
So that was all good. So that was all okay. So then I have to put my email address in. So I whispered to the person next to me and I'm like, what email address do I put in? Like, is it my own or is it the school one? And this like person looked at me like funny and they were like, well, it's the school one, isn't it? So I was like, oh, right, okay. And then I'm like, like asking them. So anyway, so I'm trying to put this school email in. And of course, people are telling me what it is and giving me the names of the letters. And basically, I can't, like 3 failed attempts and I can't get the letters in the right order and it's not letting me in. So in the end, the head teacher's like, let me just check it for you. So she checks this email address for me. So great, we've got that in. And then it asks for a password. And I'm like, I don't know what my password is. And they were like, what do you mean you don't know what your password is? You log on to your emails, it's the same as that. And I went, well, my face does it.
Yes.
It's all on Face ID. And they were like, Jo, sort yourself out. And I just thought, you have no idea. Anyway, eventually, it took about 20 minutes. We eventually got on this thing and they kind of like talked me through after I managed to lock myself out because I put the password in.
Yeah.
And the head teacher said to me, what would you have done? Like, if you were at home, like, how would you have managed it? And I said, I would have handed it to my husband. Like, I would have gone, can you just do this for me? And because I've just learned he is my biggest champion and why I have kind of done as well as I have in the areas that I've done, really. But I've just learned that actually things like that, they just make me feel bad because I can't do it. And before I knew I was dyslexic, it was like, my goodness, I can't write an email address in. Like, I must be really unintelligent. But actually now I know that it's just getting the letters in the right order and knowing the sequence of things is just tricky.
Yeah, and sometimes a bit of delegation is useful because it frees you up to do what you are good at.
Absolutely.
So you found out you're dyslexic at age 34.
Mm-hmm.
Would this be because children come along and they're being assessed and you're like, there's something here?
Yeah, sort of. So I became a mum at, I think I was 28, 29, don't remember the exact number. It's a date and a number.
Okay.
But yeah, I became a mum. I became a mum. And really what I found with every child, so I've got 3 children, was that the strategy, so I've got, and many dyslexic people will tell you, they have got complicated strategies which mask their weaknesses. So I didn't realise at the time I had lots of strategies in place that kind of enabled me to function. And with every child that came along, those strategies became less and less effective because it was becoming more and more visible. So one of my strategies was, if we go back to thinking about planning, like before I had children, it literally didn't matter how long my planning took. Suddenly you've got a child and you're limited. But not only that, the child wakes up when you're in the middle of trying to do the planning and it interrupts your thinking. Like, not only am I having to remember my own dates and times for things, there's parents' evenings to remember, there's dentist appointments, doctor's appointments. So for every child that came along, there was more and more information to remember. So life was unraveling a little bit anyway. And when I had my 3rd child, the midwife said to me, I think you might have postnatal depression. Like, I don't think your mental health is in a good place. And I didn't disagree with her.
Right.
So I actually sought some support with that. I had some counselling. And it's not uncommon to have postnatal depression. I'd done really well with the other kids. Loads of women experience it.
Yeah.
But after lots of counselling, when we actually unpicked it, we realised that lots of what I was experiencing was probably because of undiagnosed dyslexia. And around the same time, my eldest, so when I had my youngest, my eldest was 5 and was in the end of reception. And he just was not developing reading skill. And I was pretty sure that he was dyslexic because I'd done my specialist qualification by then. I was pretty sure that my dad was probably dyslexic, and that was the line that it went down. And I'd sort of self-diagnosed myself when I'd done my training, but it hadn't really mattered because it was more about kind of life was just too busy to even think about that. I think it was a combination of, for my mental health, I just kind of needed to know. There was also a bit of, like I say, my son was really struggling, and there was a bit of, well, he's just not going to be academic. I don't know why you're pushing him to be academic. And I wasn't pushing him to be academic, but I could see that there was a genuine barrier, and I wasn't prepared to make that decision when he was 5 or 6 years old that he wasn't going to be academic. And I suspected it anyway. So it was a combination of a few things that actually led to that assessment.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's a different child story to people I've heard before, actually, because most of the time you tend to hear that it's children being assessed and they start to notice the rhythm. But actually be tipped over into postnatal depression and find out it might be that your strategies, shall we say, have reached their useful limits when you pour 3 kids into your life.
Yeah. And that is exactly it. Like, I think, and that's another whole podcast in a way, really. And Natalie from Adult Dyslexia says I should talk about it more, but it's difficult because it involves the children. But I think actually being a parent with dyslexia and raising children with dyslexia is a really interesting combination, and actually brings additional challenges for sure. And I've learned all 3 of my children have got 2 of them have got formal diagnosis. One of them, I suspect, and has got extra time for exams and things. But actually, their profiles are really different. And actually, it's a really good example of how what works for one doesn't work for another.
Yes,
but the other thing that I've had to be really mindful of is not projecting my experiences of school and my experience of dyslexia onto them, because their experiences are different. So it's a really interesting dynamic and conversation for sure.
Yeah, because that was where I was going to go to next, was two routes I want to explore with this. One, you were still a teacher at this point, I assume, at 34. So did your teaching style change when you knew from beforehand? And the next thing is your children. Dyslexic, neurodiverse children, all neurodiverse people are different, including yourself. And you're in this interesting position where you've just found out you're dyslexic, you've got dyslexic children, and you're trained as a specialist in it. So you've got this nice sort of triangle going on as it all kind of comes together.
How ironic, like literally how ironic. So at 34, I was still teaching, but by this point I was actually teaching in a specialist dyslexia provision. So after I had my second child, I went back into the classroom part-time teaching. I think I was teaching year 1 at the time, actually, again. And I actually found job sharing really tricky. Again, not because I'm a control freak, but because I totally did things in my own way. And I was job sharing with somebody that was not neurodiverse.
Oh, okay.
So actually,
friction there.
There was a bit of friction, but actually for the kids, it was really good that we were teaching, because they were being exposed to 2 different teaching styles.
Oh, of course. Yes.
So in some ways, it was a match made in heaven, because for the children, it meant that they had 2 very different personalities. But actually, I found it very stressful, because the classroom was just not run how I would run a classroom. And I'm going to be honest, I was a bit chaotic, and I had to work really hard at being organised. Whereas the other person was like super duper structured and very organised. And I also just found maintaining the planning and all of that effort with my own children just exhausting. So I actually created another master strategy. I became a non-class-based Senko, which nowadays is actually quite common. But
is it?
20 years ago, was it 20 years ago? Yeah, about 18-ish years ago, I guess, 19 years ago, something like that, I don't know. All blurs into one. It was quite uncommon, but it was a massive strategy. I loved working with pupils with SEN. I was super interested in it, but it also meant that there was nobody else in the school to compare it against. And I quite quickly became an expert in my own little field. I could do the paperwork, how I wanted to do the paperwork. Yes, it was all very interesting. So that was my strategy. But because I hate blowing my own trumpet, but I was a really good Senko. So I got quite a good reputation with the local authority.
Yeah.
And the local authority actually approached me and said, "We've got this job as a specialist teacher in dyslexia, and we would really like you to apply." And I was like, "That's really lovely, but it's a full-time job and I don't want full-time. I've got 2 kids. Like, if you can make it part-time, I'll consider it." So they said, "Yeah, we'll make it part-time, because you are going to have to study at the same time." So I actually had 2. So I'm just trying to think. 2 children under 3. I had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and off I go on a 4-day residential to start an online postgraduate certificate, level 5 qualification. And I basically did this level 5 qualification. And when I look back now, I don't really know how I did it, but I did. I worked 2.5 days a week, studied 2 days a week, and then juggled the kids around that. I mean, it was the good old days when the kids went to bed at 7 and you had the evening. That was happening. And then I fell pregnant with my third, and decided that I would do the level 7 on my maternity leave. So I did the first half of the level 7 while I was still teaching 2.5 days a week. The eldest had started school, the middle one was at preschool, and I was pregnant. So I did the first half, and then literally I had my youngest, and then I gave myself 3 weeks off. And then I did the second half of the level 7 with her as a newborn, and she was such a good baby. So
I need to be by the sounds of it.
I linked up with a local school, and because part of that course is you have to do face-to-face teaching and face-to-face assessing that you had to video and send in. So literally, I would feed her, put her in the pram, run around the corner to school, set the camera up so that she was out of shot, cross my fingers that she wouldn't wake up, and then I would teach this hour lesson with her asleep in the corner, and then run home again and feed her again. But yeah, so I did that, and then literally I went back from maternity leave and I was made redundant.
No,
so again, this all kind of like coincides with having my third, like my mental health, like just lots of things were kind of changing and were tricky. And my husband's job was a bit dodgy at the time as well. So I was actually in the provision for a bit. And I loved that job. So the way that outreach provision worked was there were 4 on the island, because I'm from the Isle of Wight. Was that I was responsible for a cluster of schools. I would deliver the training and support to those schools, but I also had children that would come to me for like outreach for specialist dyslexic lessons. And I absolutely loved that. But yeah, the local authority got rid of them. So yeah, they didn't exist anymore. So that I ended up going back into school and Senkoing for a bit, because at that point I had 3 kids under 6 or something crazy like that, and that was not the right time to set up a business.
No, I could see that.
So I went back and Senkoed for a bit, and then when I was literally exhausted and had had enough of that, I set the business up. So yes, that was one question. I can't remember what your other question was.
Wow. So yes, well, I mean, there's so much to unpack in that one as well. But the 2 questions, wasn't it? The first one was, how did teaching style change? And you filled that in. And then we were asking about the 3 children, 3 different learning styles, including your own. So you're finding out about your own dyslexia, your children's dyslexia, as well as doing all of this level qualification that I hadn't realised you were doing at the same time. So have these many balls in the air that somehow didn't hit the ground.
I'm going to just go back to teaching style for a minute, because I think what's interesting is my teaching style didn't really change, because I had always taught in a really dyslexic friendly way. Unknowingly,
yes,
because I knew, and that was kind of like my thing. Like I could kind of read kids. So often people with dyslexia will smile and tell you they've got something. They totally haven't, and I know that they haven't, because I've played the same game as them. Like actually, my teaching style was already quite dyslexic friendly without realizing it. So obviously when I did the specialist qualification, that's all about assessing and all about the precision teaching, kind of reading and spelling. So obviously I learned so much about how to support that I hadn't learned as a general teacher, because teacher training is rubbish. We can talk about that if you want to in a minute. It interestingly, my style didn't massively change, because I was already that champion of those neurodiverse kids. And I had so much experience. I was so fortunate. When I went back to Senko, I actually set up a provision for speech and language pupils and autistic pupils, and I'd managed the autism team for a bit. So I was really fortunate that actually my experience in education has given me great insight and experience and training into all sorts of neurodiversity. So I've been very fortunate from that point of view. So yeah, teaching style didn't massively change. In terms of my own children then, I think when I got my diagnosis, for sure, there was a bit of coming to terms with it. So initially I just felt hugely relieved, because I'm not stupid, because I genuinely thought that I wasn't very clever. So there was initially like huge relief, but then there was a bit of anger, like, how did nobody notice this? And like when I think back to my A-levels, so I took art and theatre studies and English literature, which I really didn't want to take, but I was told I had to take 3 A-levels, and basically the English literature people didn't want me on my course, but nobody wanted me on the course, and I decided that was the lesser of like many other evils. But actually I hugely struggled with it. So English A-level was traumatic, so there was trauma to unpick. And actually the English teachers were really horrible to me, and they were really horrible to me. They really didn't want me in their class, and they saw me as a bit of a hindrance.
Oh, okay.
But actually, I was really cross that nobody had ever picked up on it, because if you looked at my GCSE grades, and if you looked at what I did holistically, anything I ever did that was practical, where I could discuss stuff, was really strong.
Yes.
And my written work was so weak. There was like this huge mismatch going on. So I just felt really angry that nobody had ever really noticed that. And my mum will tell you that she mentioned to teachers at primary school several times that she was really concerned about my spelling because it was wonky. And when I look back at writing now, oh my goodness, it's classic dyslexic. And she'd just been shut down. Oh no, she's got really good ideas. She's going to be fine. So there was definitely a bit of anger there. And I think it was a bit of a process that I kind of went through to kind of come to terms with that diagnosis. And I would say that it wasn't until about 3 years later when I actually was like, you know what, I can't do this anymore in school. I need to start playing to my strengths, like actually trying to toe the line and follow systems that I don't believe in. It's not going to work for me anymore. I think that's where I finally came to terms with it. And since really I've run my own business, that's where I've been really able to play to my strengths and understand my learning style a bit more. I think when you work in an institution like a school, education, you're expected to toe the line and follow the systems. So there isn't much room for neurodiverse thinking, if I'm really honest, because you have to teach what's on the curriculum and you have to teach what's on your plan for that day. So actually, you can't use your gut feeling and your tuition. So actually, even if you know that kids aren't ready to be taught what they're taught, you need to keep slogging away at that. And actually, as a dyslexic person doing that doesn't meet your teaching style either, because you know that's not what the kids need. So it kind of, it's a bit soul destroying in a way at times, because you just know that you're not doing anybody any favors. It's making you feel bad because you feel like you're the one not teaching them properly. It's making them feel bad because they're not getting it quickly enough. Plus, you're probably going to get in trouble because they're not going to get where they need to get to by the end. So it's quite a tricky thing to come to terms with. So I would say it wasn't until a couple of years after my diagnosis, when I set up the business, that I was like, right, let me get my head around my dyslexia now. And that's when I wrote my book, Don't Forget to Smile, which is a memoir. And really, I never really expected to sell any copies of that. It was really just a therapeutic, cathartic, get it all out. But interestingly, writing that kind of really helped me come to terms with it, but also helped me understand where dyslexia had impacted and where my weaknesses are, but equally where my strengths are and where I should be going in terms of going forward. I think what's quite interesting about my own children is that it presents very differently in girls than it does in boys.
It does, yeah.
And actually, I was able to compensate and mask mine, whereas for my son, it was blatantly obvious. From the minute he was asked to write his name, from the minute he was given letters that he needed to learn, from the minute he was given a reading book, it was obvious to me, because by that time I'd had my specialist dyslexia teacher and assessor's qualification. It just said dyslexia all over it, because I knew what I was looking for. So it was much more difficult for him to compensate because it was blatantly obvious. So as a result, his attainment was really low. And my concern was that he would be written off a bit like my dad was. So I talked earlier about kind of not projecting that past onto my children. So obviously my dad went through education many years ago, and it was the time when they still had the 11 plus. I know some local authorities still have it, but everybody sat the 11 plus. And his brother went off to grammar school and he went off to a completely different school. And to him, he then spent the rest of his life, until I diagnosed him, believing that he was unintelligent, because that's the message I believe that sends to kids. And And he left school, and in the end, he left school at 15, my dad, with no qualifications other than his cycling proficiency badge. But he was amazing at mechanics and woodwork, and he got some qualifications in that. And actually, that's what he should have used to define him going forward, should have created his own business, but he didn't. No. He ended up working in a factory all his life. Yeah. But I really didn't want that to be my son. Not that there was anything wrong with that, but I wanted him to be able to choose rather than it be his only option. And I think that, for me, is important. It doesn't matter what people end up doing, but they should be able to choose what they do rather than feel like, well, that is the only job I can do. It's my only option. So I didn't actually get him formally diagnosed until he took his SATs because the school he was in was super supportive. He was making, bar one teacher that just didn't get him, he was making kind of quite good progress. I was able to do a tiny bit with him at home. And actually I got a tutor because I felt it was quite important. I was just his mum. So together, my aim was always, we will develop functional reading and spelling skill. Like as long as I can get you to a point where you've got functional reading and spelling skill, that's all that matters to me. Yeah, makes sense. When he finally got his assessment, we actually discovered that his nonverbal reasoning was super high. Oh, nice. So actually, he was attaining below average, but he shouldn't have been. So at that point, we did kind of put a bit more intervention in to just kind of get his attainment up to average. But the other thing that I did really early on with him was he loved music. And he was quite musical. I wouldn't say he's gifted at music, like he has to work quite hard at it. But we found that thing he was good at, and we really pushed that thing he was good at. So school would empty his self-esteem bucket. He'd come out of school feeling really miserable. And we would do what we could outside of school to fill that self-esteem bucket up, giving him positive experiences with music. He joined bands, he did concerts, he just did. We took him to London to watch the Royal Marines band when he was 9. Oh, nice. And he came out. Are you ready for a long story? Because this could be a long story. He came out and he said, one day I'm going to be a Royal Marine and I'm going to be in that band. And cool. We were like, that's brilliant, actually, because that gives you something to focus on. Doesn't matter if you don't end up doing it or not, but that gives you a reason to practice your music. And it gives you a purpose to develop functional reading and spelling skill. Yeah. So he's done his education and he got into the Royal Marines band. Wow, that's cool. But he doesn't want to do it anymore. But that's fine too. And the reason why he doesn't want to do it anymore is because actually through his music, he ended up getting a scholarship to an independent school. Cool. Whereby I was like, you can have him, but he is not academic. So if you are looking for academic children, I'm not prepared to put him through that, because that is not his strength. And I don't want I want him to achieve average, but I don't want him to be pushed to be something he isn't. Yes. And we were like, no, this is not, we want him for his music. So through this school, he's just realized that, he's developed his music to a great level, but it's just opened his eyes to other things as well. And he's actually going to go traveling for a year. He's going to be go and work in a school being a gap student, and then he wants to go into events management. Oh, cool. But it's just it's interesting, like playing to his strengths a bit more. Has kept his options open. And you gave him a good reason, didn't you? He wanted to be in the Royal Marines band. Yeah. And of course, you're like, well, you have to practice your music. You need to be at a certain level where you're reading everything, and your fitness, and you can sort of use it as a target, as you said. But it doesn't matter if he then doesn't want the target anymore, because all the other skills transfer straight across to whatever he does want to do. And a really good, so for any parents listening to this, like I always say, like when you find the thing that they're really good at, they're generally more resilient with it because they want to do well at it. So like I've said, he's not naturally brilliant at it. So like he has taken grades. He's passed his grade 8 in trumpet. He's a trumpet player, but he also plays a myriad of instruments. And he used to really struggle to learn the scales. Yeah. But we've encouraged kind of critical thinking, and we've just encouraged him to use his strengths. Like, quite quickly, he got savvy to the fact that if he couldn't remember a scale, he could Google it and he could listen to it on YouTube. Like, he could search it up if he couldn't remember it. Like, he could listen to somebody else play it if he needed to. So he was actually really resilient at learning those. Quite often he would struggle to remember them in an exam. I mean, that's another story, but because we never do well in exams. But actually he had strategies. So actually, when he was struggling with maths and wasn't being very resilient, I was able to say, right, so let's think back to when you were learning that scale, and what strategies did you use? And he was able to, like, lift them all off. And I'm like, but you've had to practice. Like, that scale, you didn't pick it up and play it first time. A lot of work went into that. And this mathematical thing that you're doing here, whatever it is exactly the same. You've just got to practice that process.
Yeah.
So by nurturing those strengths, exactly as you say, it totally builds them up. And I think the thing that is really lovely is, I remember when he first went to his new school, there was a big assembly on the first day, and they called the kids out at the front. Obviously, they were all older than him, that had all got straight 9s in their GCSEs. He was absolutely right that those people should be rewarded and should be singled out, because they had worked really hard to get those 9s, and it is a huge achievement.
That's a lot.
I can remember him coming home and saying to me, I'm never going to have that moment, Mum, because I won't be able to do that. And I said to him, you won't get that moment, but you're going to get a different moment. You just need to find what that moment is. So I will share with you what his moment was, because he had it. So they have a concert twice a year at his school. And I said before, he plays quite a lot of instruments. And the autumn concert, he was in every ensemble but 3, because he doesn't play a string instrument, he didn't play the flute, and he was in upper school, so he couldn't be in the lower school choir. Apart from
I can see that.
he was in every other ensemble. And afterwards, I said to him, I've got your moment. And he was like, what? And I said, you're in the next concert, you need to play in every ensemble. And he was like, yes. So in the spring concert, he played in every ensemble. He taught himself to play the double bass for one song. He accompanied the lower school choir, played the piano, and wait for it, flute group, because obviously he's obviously been having to do quite a lot of work. He didn't have time to teach himself the flute, but the flute group played Time for Tea, and he played the teacups. But, right, I'm not joking. It sounded like he was playing like some sort of glockenspiel xylophone thing, because he got about 6 or 7 different notes out of this cup and water. And it just totally made it. But what was really lovely was his name wasn't in it, that he was in every ensemble. There was no huge announcement, and some people wouldn't have even noticed, but he knew, and we knew, and the music people knew. And it was like, I've had my moment, Mum. Like that was my moment. And I think sometimes as parents, we get really hung up, if we've got a neurodiverse child, that they haven't got the opportunities, or that we're trying to fit them into this system that just doesn't work. And I get that. But you have to find a way around it. That's why it's called Another Way Around. Like, there is another way, but you have to actively look for that. That's why my company is called what it is, because we always look for another way. Like, you have to sometimes actively look for it. And as a parent, you have to contribute to that too. Like, I think schools sometimes get a tough deal. You can't expect school to do it all. As parents, we have to take some responsibility. That's a little example, I guess, of kind of what's gone on.
That is pretty cool. And I can imagine being sat in the audience, and you're like, because it would have been like the teacup thing would have come out, and you'd be like, wow, that's kind of cool that person's done that.
Yeah.
But it would have always been, and it could have been kind of funny. But you're like, hang on, that person's done the piano, this. They're playing the teacup. It puts a different kind of spin on that performance.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, there was no announcement. If you knew, you knew. There will be people there that would have had no idea. But it didn't matter. But I think it's about searching for your children, kind of like finding ways that they can experience success that potentially other people can't.
Yeah.
And my other two children are girls, so they potentially, again, kind of find it easier to compensate. Interestingly, he's got the highest nonverbal reasoning out of the three of them. My middle one, it's more about processing. My younger one, I'm really having to watch her because she puts a lot of pressure on herself. And I'm sure you've spoken to people with dyslexia on this podcast that have got that sort of profile, where they put a lot of pressure on themselves to be perfect all the time.
Oh yeah.
And
it's not just a guest.
We have to really help her regulate her effort. So she will keep going with something until it's perfect or she's got it 100% right. So for example, homework, they're only supposed to spend half an hour on something, but if she hasn't finished it in half an hour, she'll keep going. So quite often with her, we have to, it's different. We have to actually regulate her effort, and we're actually, do you know what? Like, academic attainment isn't everything. Like, let's just balance this out a bit. But again, with the girls, we found the thing that they're really good at. They love performing. They love singing. I'm off to performance in a minute. We just make sure that they have those positive experiences. And again, there's dyslexic barriers in that. So from quite an early age, the girls have to, you're not allowed backstage because of safeguarding and stuff at different things. So they're a chaperone. So they have to be responsible for themselves and their stuff. So there's like a big element of kind of organisation, which we know is quite often kind of like secondary to a symptom of dyslexia. So that's really helped teach them about organisation and thinking things through and kind of list making and having what you need, but also being flexible when you have forgotten the thing you need, because we know that often happens quite often as people with dyslexia. Like, how do you cope when you haven't got the thing you need? How do you find a way around that? So their profiles and their styles are completely different. And the conversations I have with school about each of them are completely different. Yes. One size does not fit all.
Certainly does not. No two dyslexics are the same, aren't they?
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. And it's kind of interesting how you jump around different profiles, and you're not naive enough to think, well, the oldest is doing this, so I can get this going. And you have to keep modifying things and changing things, which I guess could add to your workload if you were completely inflexible, which you're clearly not. So
it is interesting. But then I think that's why I really feel for teachers, because I'm dyslexic. I know what it's like to be dyslexic. I've got a specialist dyslexic qualification or two, and I've taught lots of people with dyslexia, and I have to adapt and go around what I do. So a poor teacher in a class of 30 children that's probably only had 1 or 2 hours on dyslexia, and particularly a neurotypical teacher, why would a neurotypical teacher have any understanding of what's going on inside a dyslexic person's head? They just wouldn't.
No. I've had a previous person say that you can teach, as a dyslexic person, you can understand what it's like to think in a neurotypical, more linear way. But it's really hard to teach somebody who's neurotypical how dyslexia works with all the what seems completely random bouncing off everything. So
yeah.
And if you've got a class with 15% of the children are dyslexic, you're like, what the hell are they doing? I don't understand. It's got to be really, really tricky.
Definitely.
But this is where your business comes in, doesn't it? Another way around. So, I mean, I get the feeling the foundation ideas behind it were the fact you were getting quite frustrated with the limitations of the education system and want to do things your own way.
Yeah. So I'd thought about setting up my own business for a little while.
Yeah.
But I really felt strongly that I didn't want it to be private. I wanted to keep the provision in school if I could, because that's where it was most needed.
Yeah.
And I was still a bit naive in as much as I and it is naive, I wanted to help everyone. And unfortunately, you can't help everyone. I've learned the hard way. You have to put your life jacket on first.
Yes.
So I think before I first went independent, at the very beginning, I'd convinced 3 schools to buy me in for a day and a half a week between them. And my plan was for that provision to be in school. It lasted 6 weeks. before they were like, we just don't actually have the budget to do this. Or I went in to teach my dyslexic kids and they were like, we've got such and such off. Can you go and cover that class? You're a teacher. So it became apparent quite quickly that as much as I wanted to be able to keep it in school, that just wasn't going to happen.
No.
So my initial kind of thing when I first set up the business was, well, if I could just get a couple of assessments every month and keep paying the mortgage, that was enough.
Mm-hmm.
So for the first 6 months, that was all I did. And then it became apparent quite quickly that parents needed support and that there was actually a real need for it. So I became less resistant to the kind of private independent element of it, if you like, and was like, actually, I need to start advertising. I guess in a way I was kind of a bit ashamed in a way that people were having to pay for something that actually they should be able to potentially access for free. I think that kind of comes from working in school, coming from a working class family. Like, you know, my parents certainly wouldn't have been able to have afforded to have got me assessed kind of growing up. But after about 6 months, I just realised that actually there was a real gap in the market and a real need for it. So I kind of embraced it a bit more, really, and did all sorts of things. I used to have parent information sessions on different things that were free, and then assessments would kind of come from that. I dabbled with all sorts of teaching things. So I used to do sort of small group stuff on a Saturday, or I would assess children, and then kids with similar profiles I would kind of group together. And it kind of, it's only ever just been me doing the work. I kind of need to find associates and expand, but I've got a massive dyslexic barrier with that right now. I can't get my head around it. Okay. But when the pandemic hit, I was a bit stuck because I didn't really feel, so you could assess online, but for me, it didn't really work because my strengths are building relationships with people. And one of my really brilliant things that I can do, I've learned, is I'm brilliant at reading body language and kind of building a relationship with somebody really quickly. And you just couldn't get that on a Zoom call the same way that you could in the room. And I'd always been terrified of technology. So I'd dabbled with Zoom, but I hadn't really used it. But of course, the pandemic hit and we were basically all left with no choice, that we had to move to online. So through the pandemic, I taught online quite a lot. I didn't do much assessment until I could do that face-to-face again, but I taught online and kind of created some sort of parent support groups to try and help parents who were trying to teach their children at home. Did a couple of kind of like online courses for parents. And then kind of I guess I did that for about 18 months. And then when things went back to normal, whatever that was, like my children were kind of older by that point. They were all at secondary school. And I'd kind of built a bit of a following on Facebook, really, because I'm old, really, when it comes to social media. Like my main following really was on Facebook. I didn't really have an Instagram account. But on Facebook, I would like quite often share my experiences. I'd do the odd live on there. And it became, so yes, I needed to pay my bills, but it actually became more about awareness raising and educating and supporting people. And I very much come from a place with everything I do that if it can just help one person and it can make a difference to one person, then it's done its job. That's all. That's all that matters. I don't need hundreds of followers. Like I just need it to reach the one person that needs it, and it's done its job. So it became much more about awareness raising, and it's interesting because now the business is. I am really busy, and people are coming from the mainland to the Isle of Wight to assess me, and I do probably need to look at associates and things, but I've got a bit of a dyslexic. Like I say, I can't get my head around how to kind of do that next bit at the moment. And I am juggling a business and 3 children. Like I will always be a mum first. And that time goes so quick, so quickly. So sometimes it is difficult to move it forward because I'm trying to kind of help them fulfill their dreams and dyslexia not be a barrier for them. Yes. So actually, if they hit a dyslexic barrier, I would unpick that before I try to move the business forward, rightly or wrongly.
Fair enough.
It's kind of a constant juggling act. And then I joined TikTok. Probably about 15 months ago now, maybe 18 months ago. And initially I joined it because a coach I was working with was like, Jo, you need to get your face on TikTok. I was like, I really don't think I do. I've got 3 teenagers that use TikTok. A, they would be mortified. B, I just don't understand how the thing works. Like I just can't. And I kept going on and looking at it and couldn't get it. Anyway, eventually I was like, oh, I'll set up an account. So I set up an account and I just did like this one video. And my son appeared and he was like, Mum, you have just come up on my For You page. I was like, what is even a For You page? Like, I'm really sorry. And he went, you do realise that my friends might have seen it. I was like, well, I'm so sorry. Like, I'm really sorry, but I'm really sorry, but I'm giving this a go. And I said, for goodness sake, don't tell your sister because she will be like utterly mortified. Anyway, then so I sort of like kept posting. And then one weekend, this one video, I mean, it didn't go viral, but it had 30,000 views, which was quite a lot. And all 3 of the kids were like, Mom, your videos come up on our page. Like, have you seen the views? Have you seen the views? And they thought it was amazing because it's seen the views. And then they were really sweet. My son was really sweet because he was like, Mum, I just need to tell you that now this video has had lots of views. You're going to get love, but you're also going to get hate. And I just need to prepare you for that. Like, it was just so lovely. And now they've all embraced it. Well, actually, my son hasn't embraced it, but the girls have embraced it because they have done the odd dance video with me. Yes. But funnily enough, I wanted the frog song that was going around recently. I really wanted to do that with my son. I wanted to kind of interpret that with all of his musical stuff. And he was like, that's not happening, Mum, because at the time, I think I had like 67,000 followers, something like that. He was like, I am not doing that in front of 67,000 people. He was like, that is like Wembley concert or something like that, or like way more than that. And I went, oh my goodness, like I've never actually thought of that. Like, I was like, actually, perhaps I should not be posting what I post on there. But joking apart, it is tricky. Like, it as my children have got older, kind of what I've shared and how I can share is different. And obviously, like sometimes I'll come across things with people that I coach and that has to remain anonymous. Like it's a really good tip potentially to share. But it is a bit of a balancing act in terms of what I can share and how I can share it.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, it's
tricky.
It is tricky because it is, isn't it? Because it's an interesting way. Actually, you are the personality behind your business, and that's your personality, your face, drives the followers on TikTok. So it must drive the business as well. Yeah. And being authentic seems to do really well at the minute. Yeah. But how do you balance that with keeping your own sort of boundaries, I suppose, and balancing it?
It is tricky, and like sometimes I will. Like I say, I'm careful about what I share on there. And because I'm a professional and I do a professional job. So I need to be careful about what I share on there. But at the same time, I think it's really important to be real and kind of share those vulnerabilities. I mean, one of my classic dyslexic moments was I always talk about in the opening of my book, like I always forget the thing I need most, or often forget the thing I need most. And my daughter went on a school trip, a geography field trip, and required a passport for this field trip. Mm-hmm. So it was the first thing that I got out and put down. We then spent the next couple of days packing, did all of that. I go up 4:00 in the morning to drop her off at school. Mm-hmm. For some reason, I hung about. I don't know why I hung about, but I did. Anyway, 10 minutes later, she comes up to me and she's like, Mum, do you think you could pop home and meet me at the ferry? So I was like, what have I done? And she went, you've given me my sister's passport. Oh, no. I was like, I have not. She was like, I've got my sister's passport. Like she said, I know Face ID works on our phones because they do look really similar. But she went, I don't think I'm going to get through passport control with this.
Yeah.
So I'd been so anxious about putting it down that I hadn't actually looked inside and checked that it was hers.
Yeah.
But those sorts of things, pre-diagnosis, I'd have beaten myself up for that.
Yeah, of course.
For days. And actually, how unintelligent is that? And how stupid is that to have not done that? Now I just know that my working memory was overloaded. Like, actually, I was trying to make sure, because she gets so cold and she was going to Iceland, that she had enough warm clothes that the passport felt like small fry. Like, it was important, but my working memory was just overloaded, and I can rationalize that now. But certainly, in the past, that would have been something that would have eaten away at me for days.
Of course it does. Yes, because you now know the reason, and the strengths and the limitations behind it, and you can see it in that light and have the balance to it. Where beforehand, as you say, it'd been all of the negative self-talk. How could you be so silly? Blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to start winding the podcast up now, and each guest that comes on this podcast gets 3 rapid-fire questions from me. Quick questions from me. They don't need quick answers from you. So let's dive into question number 1. What prejudices have you had about dyslexia that's been proven wrong?
Prejudiced. Oh, I'm really not good at thinking on the spot. I'm going to just put that out there now. I think possibly, this is going to be really awful, but my mum didn't believe I could be dyslexic because I had a degree. And people with dyslexia how can you be dyslexic? Because her understanding, you don't know what you don't know, but like her understanding and her generation's understanding was that dyslexia meant you couldn't read, write and spell.
Yes.
Because originally that's what people thought it was, wasn't it? Like weak attainment.
Yeah, it did. Yeah. And there were lots of dyslexic people with degrees, including the 2 people on this podcast. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Degrees and a few more qualifications as well. It still blows my mind.
Yes. How did I do this? Yes.
I saw somebody with a PhD the other day.
Wow, nice.
Yes. I don't know how, they've done amazingly to get to where they've got to.
Yeah, cool. Right, question number 2. If an alien landed and you had to describe dyslexia to them, how would you do it?
Oh, my goodness. Okay, I should be really good at this because I do this with students all the time. So I just say your brain just works differently in terms of how it processes language.
Yes.
So you are really brilliant at thinking and problem solving. You will have lots of strengths from that point of view. But actually, when it comes to processing and reading language, your brain just thinks in a way that's not natural or easy. It's a man-made skill, isn't it? And something that I sometimes say to younger children is actually, if you were alive in caveman times, you'd be totally thriving because your non-verbal reasoning would have kept you alive, because we're really brilliant thinkers and can solve problems and strategies and learn by trial and error. And actually, the thing that's gone wrong for us is the introduction of language, because our brains don't process that quickly.
Yes. You are completely right there. It's interesting how human evolution's worked on and how it might go in the future with that kind of thought. Okay. Now, the last question, the serious question of the podcast from me, and you're not allowed to promote your own thing for this.
Okay.
Seeing as this is called the Dyslexia Life Hack Show, what is your favourite dyslexic life hack?
Oh, God. Well, I think it's just about I've blagged my way here. It still blows my mind. No, you can't put that on there. I can't even talk anymore. I think because I didn't know I was dyslexic, so there's definitely been a negative to that.
Yeah, of course.
But because, and it had a huge impact on my self-esteem and my confidence and my mental health. Let's not belittle that. But actually, because I didn't know I was dyslexic, and because I had a really strong work ethic, and because my parents really supported me in terms of whatever I wanted to do, I've constantly kind of pushed myself forward, and I'm so often out of my comfort zone, but I just kind of blag my way through. But I guess can you really put that on there? I don't know really. It's an interesting one.
Yeah,
don't know.
I
don't know what my other life hack would be. I guess the other thing I would say would be to really play to your strengths.
Yes, yeah.
And that's what I've done. That's what I've actively done with my own children and the children that I coach, or young people or adults, is I really talk to them about find that thing that you're really good at or that you really enjoy and use that to define you. Don't let what you can't do define you. Use the things that you can.
Yeah. No, that sounds great.
You got two options there.
Yeah,
you can cut one.
Or I can keep both. Wow. Okay. So before we sign off, is there anything else you'd like to add and where people find you?
I think it's been a great conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem at all.
So my company is Another Way Round Dyslexia Support. So you can find me obviously on the internet or interweb, as I call it. I'm on Facebook. The company's on Facebook as that, and on Instagram as that. But I'm on TikTok at Dyslexic Life with Jo Rees.
Yeah,
because it's a bit of everything.
Yes, it's good fun as well. Okay, well, that just leaves me to thank you for taking the time to come on the podcast. This has been great fun and gone in a slightly different way to what I was expecting when I wrote the show notes last night. So that's good fun.
Good.
And I want to thank everybody else for taking the time to listen, and I will speak to you in the next episode. Goodbye for now.
Thanks, Matt. Blag it. I still can't really believe that I said blag it at the end of the interview as my top dyslexic hack. And actually, it played on my mind a little bit. And the reason why it played on my mind a bit was because, well, A, that blag it was my response. B, I actually discovered another weakness, which is that actually I'm not good at being asked questions and having to come up with answers really quickly. I'm brilliant at talking and leading a conversation and linking it to my own experience, narrative thinking. But when I'm asked specific questions, often my mind goes blank. So that was another reason why I couldn't believe I said it. Another reason why I couldn't believe why I said it is actually on reflection, it really isn't. It isn't my top dyslexic hack at all. So I also discovered a dyslexic strength because I suddenly realized that so often my best ideas and thinking come like a good 24 hours after I've been asked a question I actually need time to process. So I'm now going to share with you what my actual top dyslexic hack is. And it's this: don't play a dyslexic victim. Question what action you can take to manage your dyslexia positively. I feel it's so easy to blame the environment or the people around us for making our dyslexia worse, or even use dyslexia as an excuse to not be able to do something. This is not that I don't believe dyslexia doesn't create additional barriers, because it does, but we can always do something ourselves to make small changes that can make a difference or move ourselves forward, even if it's just a tiny bit. Maybe your action is raising awareness in your workplace. Maybe it's having a conversation with your colleague and sharing what you find easy and what you find more difficult. Perhaps it's about spending some time identifying your strengths and how you can use these. Maybe it's resigning from the toxic environment you work in and finding a place that better values your dyslexic thinking, or even better, setting up your own business. It could be time to actually go and get that formal diagnosis of dyslexia so you can discover what your learning profile is to work out what you need to be a successful learner. The action that you're going to need to take will be different depending on where you are in your dyslexic journey. In terms of your life experience, knowledge of dyslexia, current work situation, financial situation, and emotionally how you feel about being dyslexic, this action you can take will vary. But actually, 36 hours after this question was posed, I have my answer, and it's here. What action can you take to manage your own dyslexia positively? So there we go. I would just really like to thank Max so much for inviting me onto his podcast, and I can't wait to listen to it back, I think. Although I'm slightly scared what else I said and didn't realise. Have a great day, guys. And for the record, I think I was right. I did blag it. I blagged it until I had a better answer.